Ben Bradley.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to bring this issue to the floor of the House and to be able to discuss opportunities to open up school sports facilities to the wider community. It's an issue very close to my heart as a self-confessed sports fanatic, hockey coach, occasional football referee, parent of kids involved in grassroots football, and as someone whose original ambition was actually to be a PE teacher. I can't overstate how important I think sport, and particularly grassroots and community sport, is to our physical and mental health, to the development and growth of our young people, to our social fabric, to our general well-being. And the role that sport plays, the value of it in the education and development of the next generation, I think has always been undervalued by governments of all stripes, quite frankly. While the health benefits of physical activity are obvious, it actually also plays a major role in things like academic achievement and careers. Dundee University have shown that an increase in academic performance by students who participated in more exercise than their peers is something they can scientifically measure. It's a real thing. If I wanted to get technical, I could even talk about how other studies have shown regular exercise leads to better levels of concentration, better memory. But the real point that sport adds value across the board when it comes to developing young people is an important one that I consistently reiterate in the space. I think is really important. We also know sport doesn't only help develop the academic potential of a young person. Sport, particularly team games, helps to encourage the social development of young people and often provide that first instance of teamwork for many kids. All of us who played sport also know about the highs and lows it brings, the character building that comes from those experiences, the determination, competitive spirit, overcoming challenges. And these experiences help to make our young people more resilient, better able to deal with the rest of their lives. The most disadvantaged communities also tend to be the least active and also tend to have the least access to sports facilities. So it's a levelling up mission too, Mr Deputy Speaker, and it's really important. I keep saying it's really important. So that said, we need to help more people to access facilities and to access sport. And there's a lot to that. I could bang on forever. We very recently had a debate with the Sports Minister here on the front bench on sport and community and school sport in particular. So I'm not going to reiterate all of that. But as we've got an Education Minister here with us, very grateful for her time. I'll flag again that the PE and school sport premium is really, really important, and I know it's being discussed, but teachers are contacting me on a regular basis to say, can we get that finalised, can we get that sorted? I will give way.
Thank you. Thanks to the Honourable Member for giving way. Does he agree with me on the point about the funding for the school sport premium and with the Football Association, who have raised concerns that often the funding for that is announced very, very late in the academic year, and therefore schools are really struggling to make plans on how they're going to use that, and often laying off staff who they then have to go and re-employ. And therefore, would he agree with me that it would be a good thing if the Department for Education and the Treasury could perhaps agree that settlement for 2 or maybe 3 years so that planning and provision and people can be put in place?
Intervention. I think she's absolutely right. We all know the economic challenges around long-term planning recently, but the sooner we can get to a longer-term security around staffing, the better. And I'd also raise the same point, although it's a health department funding stream, around funding for school games organisers, and they're in the same boat where if they're not confirmed soon, they're going to have to lay people off and then start again, and the cost of that is unnecessary and burdensome for schools. But this evening I wanted to focus on school facilities, and the only way to increase one way to increase sports facilities across the country would be just to ensure that those facilities that already exist, those at schools, are open for public use. We're investing in new sports centres. I've seen particularly lots of levelling up funds recently and other funds come forward for new facilities, including in my own constituency, Warsop Leisure and Health Centre, which is really positive. It means that thanks to this government, we'll finally replace the old dilapidated leisure centre that Mansfield Independent-led council closed about 4 years ago. And that's great. That's something I've campaigned on, something I've been keen to secure, and I'm really pleased we're going to be able to do that this year. But I look across the road from the leisure centre, I see a school sports field with football pitches, I see a mugger, a basketball court, tennis courts, school sports facilities that are already there. And it's fortunate in Warsop that some of those are open to the wider community, only some, not all of them. But when I first came here to Parliament 5 years ago, Mr Deputy Speaker, I was shocked to find that actually the general public aren't able to access 45% of the sports facilities in state-funded schools. So almost half have no public access at all. I will give way.
I thank my old friend for giving way. Does he agree with me that some of the indoor facilities, particularly swimming pools, but also gyms, the problem may be that the cost of heating at the moment is actually exorbitant, and that may prevent the school actually doing something that will actually cost money, even if they charge people to use the facilities?
Thank you for that intervention. I wasn't going to go through everything we discussed in the sports debate before, but we did talk at length about that exact issue. And he's absolutely right that the cost of running sports facilities, and particularly swimming pools, is hugely challenging at the minute. And the support that's come forward around business energy support doesn't tackle that, doesn't specifically help or offer that support for leisure facilities. And that's something that I've asked ministers to look at, and I know he has spoken about. So it would be great to see that support come forward for those kind of facilities to make them more accessible and affordable. Is absolutely right. So I think the proportion actually, in light of that, would be even higher than that 40%, 45% now, because even in my own county, even in my own constituency, there are multiple large secondary schools that have recently removed that access to sports facilities for communities because post-COVID, additional costs, reduced commercial viability of running centres because customers disappeared during COVID, has made them a drain on school budgets. Now, I'll give you an example, Mr Deputy Speaker. So at Manor Academy in Mansfield Woodhouse, post-COVID, the school closed their sports centre for community use. It's understandable. I'm not going to point fingers at the school because they feel, and quite understandably, as I say, that they should direct their funding towards academics, the students. It's not their job to subsidise community leisure provision. They were losing money on it. So I do understand that and sympathise. So I'm not here to assign blame. But we are 18 months on now, and still multiple football pitches, a hockey pitch, the only hockey pitch in Mansfield, indoor sports hall and other facilities remain inaccessible. The hockey club in particular, because it's the only suitable hockey pitch in the whole of the district, are currently effectively homeless as a result. And I've been trying to broker a solution between councils, the Academy Trust, North Notts Hockey Club, but it's been a real slog and has taken 18 months now. I think we're getting there. I'm hopeful that when we meet again in a few weeks' time, we will have a solution to take forward. But as I'll come on to, the challenges, the bureaucracy around trying to pull that together has been really difficult, and it shouldn't be that hard when all the partners involved on the surface want to make it happen. But that's a prime example.
Mr Deputy Speaker, my honourable friend is making an excellent speech highlighting a very important issue. I'd like to ask my honourable friend, does he agree with me it might be helpful if the Department for Education's model lease for academies included a requirement that where it can be done at no cost to the school, that those taxpayer-funded sports facilities should be available to community use when not in use by the school?
I think for that intervention, that's absolutely right. I think that's one option where taxpayers are funding these facilities. They should be able to use them, or in the case perhaps at Manor where school don't feel able to do that, give it back. Let the community run it, let the District Leisure Trust run it, or somebody else who is willing to open it up. So absolutely, I thank him for raising that point. But what we've ended up with is arguably the best sports facilities in Mansfield Woodhouse that supported countless grassroots clubs where facilities are there, they are visible, people know them, they used to play on them, but they're not any longer available. Meanwhile, we're short of hockey pitches, we have none, short of rugby pitches, short of football pitches. All the major venues are full across the area, across the whole county. In fact, I get grassroots clubs coming to me all the time, seeking more capacity, particularly for grassroots football, when every school has a massive flat field that you could play lots of football at if it were available. And sport, as I said earlier on, is never, although we all think it's really important, it never is quite the top priority in times of cost of living and COVID and health crises and everything. Everything's a crisis. It's rarely the top priority for any of those organisations, whether that's schools, councils, government. So it never makes it to the top of the to-do list to tackle this. That's something I'm trying to shift within my own organisation to make sure that the provision for community services, community sports is top of our agenda. All of that prevention stuff means that we as a council don't have to step in and sort everybody out later on. I think sports facilities are a big part of that. And I guess I'm asking the Minister to try and help me shift that dial here in government. This does fall across departments. It's never anybody's top of their list. We all talk about it, but we need to shift the dial. The example at Manor represents a missed opportunity to significantly boost grassroots sport, to meet some of that need, obviously to access all the positive implications it has for the community, like improved physical and mental health. In many cases, facilities already exist. Surely common sense dictates it would be quicker and cheaper to simply open up existing facilities than to build new ones in many cases, particularly in the light of rising costs of those capital projects. A small amount of infrastructure in terms of admin support for bookings would be enough at some sites. At others, advice on managing liability and insurance, wading through the bureaucracy of all of it, would allow clubs to take on management of facilities at weekends. At some, you might need a small amount of capital funding for a porta cabin for some changing rooms that's separate to the school buildings, or to sort out gates and access arrangements. These are small things. They're not unachievable things, but they can seem, when you have to get all of these partners to work together towards that goal and you've got to wade through the legals and everything else, like they are very difficult. It's also the case that where clubs have some certainty for the long term, they can then attract funding from existing routes like Sport England, like the Football Foundation, County Council's local community fund. Some of this could be managed locally, so I'd volunteer my own council to manage it, to pilot that administration if we could access the support to ensure staff capacity up front. It doesn't need government to do it in that sense, but where it does need government help is to set the clear direction of travel. Now that could be through things like changing those lease agreements to make sure that taxpayer funded facilities are available to taxpayers. Could be to offer capacity to get started, a bit of upfront support on the proviso that these schemes have to become self-sustaining in the long term. I think many of them could be, but you need an initial outlay on making those facilities fit for purpose, on managing that administration of things like booking systems and all the rest of it. And in many cases, I think it would be self-funding. It needs support to get going. And given that it's a levelling up outcome, as I've said, with disadvantaged communities having least access very often, perhaps where levelling up funds are likely to be returned in the coming months, rising costs making projects unviable, we're going to see, I have no doubt, councils turn around and say, I can't deliver that anymore. Perhaps some of that funding could be repurposed to deliver some of these outcomes. Second, government needs to be absolutely clear that they expect everybody to facilitate this, and it speaks to my honourable friend's point earlier on, and to be permissive when it comes to navigating the bureaucracy. The biggest barrier to all of it, even though partners want to work together, is the system. The perceived safeguarding implications for schools, even on a weekend where nobody's there, legal teams stressing about insurance, who's got liability if somebody falls over and all the rest of it, local planners rejecting permissions for even the simplest things like, I want to use the site slightly different hours. You have to go through a bureaucratic planning process to achieve that in many cases. It shouldn't be that difficult. And a lot of schools, and we need to be very, very clear with schools, some don't see it as their job, understandably, some don't have capacity, others just won't help and don't want to help to get it going. So it does require lots of partners to pull together, all be pushing in the same direction, and to all prioritise this at the same time. So it seems sometimes like it's not doable. It shouldn't take 2 years to sort a solution for Manor Sports Centre. So I think government needs to be really clear and demand that taxpayer-funded facilities are available for taxpayers, and demand that partners and stakeholders should be facilitating that use and not putting barriers in the way. So I've heard about opening school facilities programme, but I can't point to a practical example of where it's happened. I wonder if the Minister can tell me about that. I've heard of pilot schemes to try and facilitate the administration and bookings as I've described, spoken with the last but one Sports Minister about those pilots, but I've not heard of any outcome. I've not heard of what the next steps are. If ministers want to help my council with some initial capacity, I will happily work with government to get this up and running and not improve the case. I know officials will no doubt point in the department to some open process of pilot projects or whatever, but I'm standing here volunteering, so if someone needs to pick a next step and give it a go, tell me what it is, and I'll work with government to make that happen. But I hope the Minister can perhaps update me on those programmes and what's happening, particularly in light of the new sports strategy, which I know is not her department, but I understand will include plans on accessing facilities for grassroots sport. What's the next step in making this happen and ensuring that those facilities in our communities aren't mothballed, aren't unavailable for use, but actually are there for the community? How can I take that forward and ensure that Mansfield residents have full access to all the wonderful community spaces that they have often previously enjoyed but can't, instead of them being locked away? I look forward to the Minister's comments.